Hey you, are you an indie game developer passionate about game development? Maybe you're an industry professional, maybe a hobbyist. The point is, I have the podcast for you, the Indie Allies podcast. It's a podcast all about game development from indie game developers like you and me. We talk about the work we're working on, the things we've learned, and things we want to share with you guys. We also bring on special guests that specialize in different subjects so we can ask them questions and learn about their things as well. It's a ton of fun and we'd love to have you there. It's on almost every podcast platform, and there's a link in the description to the one that's on this channel specifically. Without further ado, here's the video. Hello everybody and welcome back to Demystifying Inventory Systems. If you missed part 1, it'll be in the description below. Let's get started. Last time we talked about what an inventory is, what an item is, and to briefly go back over that, an inventory holds an item, but what is an item? An item is a collection of data that has to travel around together, right? All the components coming together. So the example I used was an iron dagger from Skyrim. It has a static mesh, it has sounds it plays when it hits things, it has a name, a description, and all this stuff follows each other around. We then created a blueprint that could take that structure or collection of data and take those pieces and break them apart and dynamically update a blueprint in order to show the correct static mesh. The one last thing we did was we implemented an interact system, which, as you can see, if I look at the dagger and hit F, you'll see at the top left we are getting a print string of hello, which means that the interact request is indeed going to our item blueprint, which is currently set to a dagger, and its defined response is to say hello. Today we're going to focus hard on the widget side. We aren't necessarily going to put an inventory together yet, but you'll see what each part of the widget is going to do so it can eventually become an inventory. Let's start by going into our content browser. Within my dark BPs, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this widgets. I'm going to open that up, and within widgets, I am going to go into user interface and create a widget blueprint. We're going to click on user widget, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to call this W for widget underscore item slot, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and hit Control Shift S to save all and open that bad boy up. So the first part of the inventory system we're going to create is actually going to be the item slot. It's probably the most important part, as it's the thing that's going to display all of the information. By default, this display grid here, if you look at the top right, is set to fill screen. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to change this to desired. What that is going to do is when we set a specific size for something, it's actually going to be that size. If you have it on fill screen, it makes everything kind of like a weird 16:9 box, which is good when you have a canvas panel and you're trying to create the actual widget or like just heads up display that the user is going to see. But when you're creating something that's just going to be a smaller part of a whole, you want it to be the desired size. So that way you know what it's gonna look like when you apply it to the HUD as a whole. If that didn't make sense, don't panic. We're gonna make a little icon that shows the item. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need is something called a size box. So at the top left here, we're going to type in the word size, and you'll see the only option is a size box, and we're going to drag that onto the grid. You'll see that there's nothing here. That's because the desired size by default is to fill whatever space it's in. But since we're set to desired, there is no space for it to exist in, thus we can't see it. So what we're going to do is we are going to do a width and a height override. Now, if you want a bit more of a modular system, you can set a minimum or a maximum, so that way it can kind of morph and move around to fit things better. but I want something very specifically sized. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and make this a square. So a 50 by 50 square that I still can't see. I wonder if it's off screen. It is. Just zoom out a little bit if it's not there. Mine was here for some reason, so I'm just gonna move it to the center and zoom in here. All right, so here's our 50 by 50 size box, nice and empty. Now, here's what we need to know about size boxes. They can only have one child. Now, this is important because if you start trying to throw things into this size box, it's not going to work unless you know how to structure those things appropriately. Let me give you an example. The first thing we're going to need is something called an overlay. Go ahead and drag one down here and plop it onto the size box. You'll see there's no issues. But then try to grab a second one and put it onto the size box. It'll say widget cannot accept additional children. So now you're kind of wondering, okay, cool, it can only accept one child. How are we supposed to fill this with information? Well, luckily, it's children can have children. The size box, again, is setting the size of our element. The overlay is nothing more than a parent to say that certain widgets can overlap each other. Otherwise, our individual elements are going to take up their own space and cannot overlap. So for example, if we were to put a background on this item slot, we wouldn't be able to put anything else in it because it can't overlay each other. However, with the correct use of some of the more elements we're going to get here, we will be able to do just that. So let's go ahead and just get a image. Take the image and drag it onto the overlay. This is where I'm going to force you to start naming things. Honestly, sometimes I even name the size box in the overlay. But for now, we're at least going to do it on the image. So we're going to go ahead and click that image, and you can either press F2, or if you want, you can go up here to the top right, and we're going to delete image 47. That's pointless for us. I guess you could leave image, but I'm going to make it underscore background. This makes it very clear what this element is doing for us. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, we have padding, horizontal alignment, and vertical alignment as our first little options here. Well, because of the size box, we can actually just have it fill. So if we fill and fill, boom, we now have a background for each and every single item slot. However, white is a horrendous color for this. So we're going to go over to the color and opacity, which is just a little bit under that. And I like to just make it a pretty dark gray. Makes it very easy to see, and it's not assaulting your eyeballs. Now we need to apply something that is going to organize the incoming information. If we just start throwing stuff in the overlay, it's not going to know where to go. It's all going to end up here at the top left side. And you can't just click and drag stuff around like that in a size box. So the best thing to do is normally to get a whiteboard. And you'll want to kind of, is this going to be too blurry? I bet it is. And you'll want to go ahead and start prototyping out what you want the icon to look like. Obviously, we know it's going to be a square. We got that background image there. Then I think most of it will also be an image. So up here will be the actual icon. So we'll have like the dagger. Excuse my quick art. Then I think we'll probably have a lot of space for the name in case the item gets really, really large, or not the item, but the name gets really large. And then we'll have a very small spot here for maybe the quantity. So I don't know, we'll just put like a 0 there for now, which makes no sense, but it's for the quantity. So now we can have a basic structure that we can start building in our slot. So in order to do that, we're going to need a couple of things. The first thing we're going to need is a vertical box. So this is a vertical box, and what it does is it basically says, hey, all of my children are going to be lined up in a row from top to bottom, i.e. vertical box. We're going to drag that, and we're going to place it not on the image background, but on the overlay. Now we have the background image and we have the vertical box as children of the overlay. And as you can see, they're overlaid on top of each other. The vertical box, of course, taking up no space. In order to fix that, you remember from the background image, we can come up here to the top right. And for the alignment, we're just going to do fill and fill. So now we have a vertical box on top of our background. Now, what needs to go into that vertical box? Well, if you remember, there was the icon for the dagger. Then underneath, we had a name and a quantity. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up here and we're going to add another image. This image is going to be the icon for the item. So I'm going to go ahead and take the image and I'm going to make it the first child of the vertical box. Then I'm going to immediately rename the image to image underscore icon so we know what it's being used for. And this time we actually don't want it to fill. So the image icon, we actually want it to be completely center. So we want to center horizontally and we want to center vertically. Now, the reason we're doing that is because if it's set to fill, if our icon is, let's say 32 by 32, if it's set to fill, it will stretch and warp that outside of its aspect ratio in order to fill up the space. So instead, we just want it to be centered both horizontally and vertically in order to maintain that size and aspect ratio. Now, obviously, this isn't looking great yet, but we'll get to that. For now, we also know that we're going to need both a name and a quantity underneath this image. We have a vertical box. We put an image on top, which means whatever we put next is going to go underneath it. However, if we put both the name and the quantity underneath it without doing anything special, it's going to look like this. The name will be here, the quantity will be here because the vertical box is still aligning its children in a vertical row. So there's something called a horizontal box. So what we're going to do is we're going to erase the image search there, and instead we're going to start typing in horizontal, and we're going to add a horizontal box to the vertical box. Now, because we have a horizontal box, it will act as a single child of the vertical box. As you can see right now, it's set to fill horizontally and fill vertically, but the size is set to auto. Go ahead and hit size and set it to fill, and you'll see that it took up a way more space in that case. And it will dynamically adjust, so don't worry. We'll get to making this actually looking well in a moment. So now we can actually add in two things of text as children to the horizontal box. So if we go ahead and drag one down to the horizontal box, and then we drag another down also to the horizontal box, you'll see it doesn't fit and it looks like poop, but we'll fix that in a moment. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the first text, and notice that it's filling. It's saying fill horizontal and fill vertically. Instead, because this one's going to be the name, so in fact, where it says text block 108, let's do text block underscore, we'll just do item name like that. And then for this next one, text blocks 318, just make this text box quantity. Now let's make these way more appropriate. So instead of a giant thing like text block, go ahead and just make this like underscore ph name, ph meaning placeholder. And then on the other one, we will do underscore ph quantity. And they're way too big. So let's take both of these and reduce their size. In order to do that, you should see on the right hand side here, one of these says font. If we pop that open, you'll see we have a size of 24. Let's try like 8. That's already significantly better, but it's still quite large. Remember, we're dealing with a 50 by 50 item slot. So technically, if you're going to have the name there, it might need to be a little bit bigger. So if you're making an inventory system for your game right now, just remember we might actually be making a too small of a slot. Then you'll want to adjust this and make it look well. Once you've reduced it down to, I've got mine set to 4. We want the horizontal alignment for the name to be left on the horizontal, and for the vertical, we want it to be center. And then for the quantity, let's go ahead and bring its size down to 4. We want it to be right vertical alignment with a center vertical alignment. And now you'll see the name will be here, the quantity will be here, and then we have our icon up above. However, I think we can all agree that down here, the name and quantity has too much vertical justification and the icon doesn't quite have enough. So how do we fix that? Well, first off, make sure you compile and save. It's always good to do that frequently. So to reduce the size of our horizontal box, go ahead and click on that horizontal box on the left-hand side. Instead of filling that vertical alignment, let's go ahead and just make it a bottom align instead. So then now you can see that that horizontal box dropped down and it's only the vertical size of whatever its contents are. So in this case, it's the text. Now it's saying I'm going to vertically align to the bottom, not fill, vertically align to the bottom where my height is the size of my content. However, you'll notice if you look, there's still this weird space between the top and the bottom. Like you can see that our image here didn't adjust. So to fix that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna click on that image icon. You'll see that it's already supposed to be center in both the horizontal and vertical alignment, but it's not quite doing the behavior we would expect because it's got all this space, but instead it's centered right about here. The main reason for that is because we've got it set to an auto size, and then we have a vertical and horizontal alignment, and it's not quite sure what to do with that information. I feel like there could be a argument to be had that that should work, but we can still fix it ourselves. And what we're gonna do is, as long as we keep this a square, the aspect ratio of the icon should be fine. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna increase this to maybe, well, not 50. 50 is the size of the whole thing. So maybe like 45 by 45. Ooh, that shoved that down way too much. Let's do 38 by 38. That's a fair bit better. And in order to bring this down, something that we're gonna have to do, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is we're gonna have to add some padding to just the top. So in order to add padding to just the top, we actually need to set a number here. So we're gonna set a number of like 5 padding, but then if you add a comma and a 0, a comma, oh, I don't know why I put a space there, another 0, another comma, and another 0, and press enter, that's the wrong direction. Sorry, that took me a second. Okay, it's 0, 2, 0, 0, and you get a nice little actual layout like this. And we're gonna hit compile and save. Let's simplify this. Don't get this all twisted. I don't want you to think inventory systems are difficult. Remember, it's a bunch of information traveling around together. And the blueprint simply just said, oh, here's all that information. I need to update my static mesh. Well, the widget is no different. We now have a place for the icon to go, the name of the item, and the quantity all right here. So if we had access to that information, all we would have to do is plug it in. In order to do that, a couple of things need to be changed. The first is click on your image icon, and never mind, it doesn't need to be changed. We're already good because it is saved as a variable. However, we do need to check our text boxes. So let's click on the PH name. It is not a variable, so make sure you check this as a variable. Same as the quantity, and hit compile and save. And what that does is it basically says, hey, these are things that are going to change, so we need to mark them as a variable. Otherwise, they will never change. They're static and it doesn't care. Before we continue, what we need to do is we actually need to set up a fake inventory in order to draw from it and update our UI. Obviously, we'll eventually have a real inventory, but we need a fake one first so that way we can get this set up. What we're gonna do is very simple. I'm just gonna head over to content. I'm gonna go into my first person character, the blueprints first person character. I'm gonna open that up. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm just gonna call that variable inventory. The variable type is going to be the structure we created. So struct underscore item. And if you remember when I hit compile and save, you'll see that now I can have an item in my inventory. Some of you that are a little bit more quick or ahead of me may know that eventually this will be an array, but for the sake of our fake inventory right now, I'm not going to worry about anything. All I'm going to do is in the event graph, as you remember, we already have a way to interact with items, and we're getting that interact request. I made an error. Sorry if this is a bit jarring in the editing. What we're going to need is a new blueprint interface. So I like to separate my interfaces based on what it is exactly they do. So I don't want to add this to the interaction because it's going to directly communicate with the player. So what I want to do is create a new blueprint interface. I'm going to call it BPI underscore player requests. Then I'm going to open up the BPI player requests, and we're going to create a new function. I'm going to rename it to add item request, just like that. For an input, we need to know what item we're trying to add. So we'll just call this item to add. That is going to be, as you know, a struct item. Then for the output, what we need is success. So we need to know if it gets successfully added or if the inventory is full, stuff like that. So we'll hit compile and save, and let's actually put this into use. In order to do that, first, the BP first person character needs to implement that interface we just created. So go into your class settings, and we're going to go to implemented interfaces. We're going to click add, type in BPI to access the ones we've created, and I'm going to do BPI player requests and hit compile and save. On the left hand side, I'm going to open up this little interfaces thing here, and we are going to define what happens whenever we get this interface request. So obviously what we need to do is check and see if our inventory is full, yada, yada, yada. But for now, we're not going to do that. For now, we're just going to simply add it to our one slot we know it exists so we can make sure we start populating the widget. You'll see that we have our inventory. Normally it will be an array, but remember, we're just doing some testing and trying to get the widget online. So we're going to go ahead and pull out the inventory and hit set, because we both know this isn't an array. It's one single struct. And we can right click that inventory and split, and you'll see here's the information from that single item from the struct. And the item to add is also that struct, if you remember. So you can also split, and you'll see these are exactly the same. However, which is great because they're the same, we can go ahead and recombine these for now. And then we can just take the item, add it to the inventory, and then simply say it was a success. Now, what is the biggest issue with what we just did? If there's multiple items, they're just going to replace what's happening in that one item slot. Normally that success is there to say, hey, either the inventory is full, there was an error like communicating between both containers. There's a whole bunch of reasons why success is there. This is a test for the widget. Now the player can receive an add item request where the item is defined and it gets set into the inventory. However, we need our item to actually try to add itself. So let's go ahead and reopen back in our actors that BP item. Oh, and conveniently it's already open. Yours will start probably right here. Don't forget on the left hand side, we are defining the interact request, because as you remember, right now it's set to just say hello, but we don't want that. So we're going to delete that. Instead, what we're going to do is whenever we receive an interact request, we know that we want this BP item to be pick upable or try to be picked up. So what we're going to do is we take the interactor, which in this case is going to be the player, and we send it a message. What message do we send it? Well, what about an add item request like we just created? You'll see here that we have an incoming interact request. The defined response from this item is to be picked up. So it then says, oh, hey, actually, you're supposed to pick me up. The target, of course, being whoever interacted with it. Now, what about the item to add? Well, remember in the construction script, that's kind of where it's actually deciding what item it actually is, because we have it set up so the designer can come over here to the right-hand side and pick an item that they've created. Well, because of that modular design, we need to add a little bit more to the construction script. It's pretty simple, actually. all we're going to do is in the variables, we're going to add, and we're going to call it item ID. I don't really have a good name for this. And of course, this is just going to be that struct item that we created. And essentially, we're going to pull that out and we're going to hit set. And because we had to break it here, we'll break it here as well, or split it. And we'll simply plug this data straight in. So let's not get lost in the sauce. What did we just do? If you remember, the construction script is the thing that's making the blueprint update what it is, specifically right now the static mesh, depending on what item we select. Well, we're adding one more step. We're basically saying, okay, the designer has picked something, so update the static mesh, and also go ahead and save those details within yourself. And the reason we are having these details saved within ourselves is because when we get that interact request and we're like, hey, you need to pick me up, we need to be able to pass that specific instance of a struct to the player so the player can add it to its inventory. So, item to add is going to be that item ID. So we're gonna hit get, and you'll see we can plug that straight in. And then the return node will be whether or not it was a success or not. So we can hit compile and save. Are you starting to see how an inventory system is essentially just a bunch of organized data running around? I hope so. So now let's quickly make a heads up display so we can add the icon to the screen and test that everything is going to work the way we want it to. I'm going to go back into my widgets. I'm going to create another user interface widget blueprint. I'm going to call this W_in-game HUD, just like that. I'm going to open it up. Within here, I'm going to type in canvas. And now we actually want it to be screen size, fill screen. This is replicating what the screen is. And we can actually add our user created stuff. So if we go over here and we type in W_, you'll note that our item slot actually appears, and we can drag that onto the screen. We can kind of place that wherever we want. I'll just kind of place it a little off to the right here for now and hit compile and save. We do need this to show up on screen though. Normally you wouldn't want to do this in the first person character, but we are doing this for debug purposes. So I'm going to go into my event graph on the first person character, and I'm going to create a new custom event. In all capital letters, I'm going to type in the word debug_, and then I'm going to name it HUD like that. So debug HUD. Out of the debug HUD, I'm going to create a widget. The widget will be the HUD we just made. So W_in-game HUD. Out the return value, we will promote it to a variable. This is so we can access it way more easily, because if you create it and you don't make it a variable, you can then never access it again. So instead, we just make it a variable. And I'm gonna name this, I don't know, W_HUD ref for HUD reference. And then I will go ahead and add to viewport, which is the screen. This is debug stuff, so we're gonna go ahead and hit comment. We're gonna just type in debug widget like that. And I'm gonna make this like an obnoxious orange because it's for debug purposes and it'll be easy to find later. Then we need to create the event begin play. So I'm gonna hold P and click. That'll give us the event begin play. And we want to just call the debug on event begin play. And for those that like to keep things organized and nice, I like to grab my event begin play and hit comment, type in begin play, show bubble when zoomed, and make it the most red I possibly can. And then you can always easily find your event begin play. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit compile and save. And let's just see if that shows up on screen. Let's go ahead and hit play. And it does. You'll see that it's actually showing up in a very weird way. The reason it was showing up in a weird way is when we added it to our panel. Remember how I made that size box specifically 50 by 50? Well, for some reason, whenever we added this to our panel here, or our canvas, you can re-change the size. So if we just go ahead and make this 50 by 50 and hit compile and save, You should then, of course, see the actual 50 by 50 node that we created. Again, it's small, but remember that's because this is going to be one inventory slot that we're working with right now. All right, let's go over exactly what we want to have happen. Right now, we can hit play, we can hit F, which I don't have the debug on, but you know, we're shooting a sphere trace forward. If it hits an item, that item is holding the struct that makes it the item that it is. It has a defined response to say, hey, you've interacted with me. I am supposed to tell you that you're going to pick me up. Is that possible? The player then looks at its inventory and it will normally be like, hey, you know, is there enough space? But for now, it's just gonna say, yes, I can pick you up. And it's going to set that inventory slot that it has to the item we just picked up. However, we need that information to then be broadcast to that item slot we have. So let's get the information to the item slot. So I'm back in the BP first person character. Remember, this is where we're setting the inventory slot. So what we're gonna do is we're going to immediately update the HUD and say, hey, whoa, there's an item in this slot now, you need to update. We're gonna do that right here. But in order to do that, we're gonna have to go back to our widget item slot and open it back up. And we're gonna go over here to the graph. The graph is very similar to any other blueprint. For now, I'm not gonna mess with any of these. I'm just gonna create a custom event. I'm just gonna call it add item to slot. We're going to need an input of the item we're adding. And you guessed it, struct underscore item, boom. Then we can simply split this and we have the name, mesh, description, and icon. And since we have that data, we can apply it. Well, what do we want the image icon to be? Well, if we get the image icon, we can pull out and do set brush, and you'll want the one down here that is a little blue dot. And remember, we had the item icon was a brush, so we can plug that straight in. And now the image icon will be set up to whatever the item was. We can do this with the item name, for example. So let's get the item name. We can pull out, do set text, the one with the pink dot. Go ahead and plug that in. Guess what? We have an item name. Now it is going to do a convert, let it, it's fine. This is one of the reasons we used a string, by the way, is because of how it converts like this. I'm gonna go ahead and just put a double dots here to make it a little easier to see. And since we don't have quantity quite set up yet, whenever this is called and these are set, we'll just go ahead and set the quantity to 1. So we can just go ahead and hit set text, plug that in, and set it to 1, and we'll hit compile and save. Now obviously this is not gonna work whenever we have a big inventory system with a bunch of slots. This is for testing purposes and to really just show you how basic it is, what's happening whenever something's displayed in an inventory. So we have add item to slot going on right here when it requires the item. Let's go back to the first person character. So boom, we picked up something that's in our inventory. So let's get that reference we created earlier and run the custom event we just created. I think it was called add item to slot. Oh, if it doesn't show up, you need to hit compile first. Go ahead and pull that up and add item. So we're gonna go ahead and pull out the HUD. If you remember, one of the children of the HUD is that slot. So we're gonna get the item slot that we have as a part of it. And if you remember, we literally just created a custom event called add item to slot like that. We can plug this in directly. We have the item and plug in the return node and hit compile and save. So what's happening? We send a request. The request says, well, actually, I need you to let me know if you can pick me up. Here's my details. The inventory says, oh, yes, I have that slot available. I will accept you. Then whenever it accepts it, it says, oh, but we need to let the UI know that this is now filled. send the information to the UI so the UI can update. Let's go ahead and see it in action. I know it's rather small, I apologize, but if we go up to the dagger and we hit that button, boom, check it out. It now knows in that slot we have the dagger, it has the name, it has the quantity, and it has the icon. Again, these are not perfect practices in this particular episode. This is to show you what's happening and to make sure it's all working. However, I must end this one here. If you're enjoying, please like, comment, and subscribe. And also, we have a new podcast called the Indie Allies Podcast. It's a podcast all about indie game development where we just talk about the things we've been doing, what we've been learning, demystifying all the conspiracies about the game industry, reacting to the news, and bringing on special guests that have different opinions and different specializations than our own so we can learn from them as well. It's been a lot of fun to make so far, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. It's on pretty much all major podcast platforms. Again, it's called the Indie Allies Podcast. It's also on my YouTube that you're on right now. I hope to have you listen to it. But anyway, I hope you guys are enjoying the series, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.